Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football, continuing to take a look at some of our favorite transfer portal classes as the transfer portal winds down, and we're taking a look at the Wisconsin Badgers. We talk about this a lot in terms of first-year head coaches and the opportunity they have to kind of turn a program around relatively quickly by adding a lot of talent in the transfer portal. Luke Fickell taking over in a little bit of a unique spot where this Wisconsin program was in a pretty darn good spot. Like the roster and the talent was pretty healthy. So Luke Fickell didn't need to go crazy like Colorado in the transfer portal. But bringing in Phil Longo, kind of revolutionizing this offense, they needed to add some guys. And we think they did a very good job adding some quarterbacks, adding some playmakers on the outside. This is a very fun team to talk about. Again, before we even get into it, just want to say thank you to you guys. The Wisconsin fans, you guys have been awesome. We did the spring game. We've talked a lot of Luke Fickell. The support you guys have shown truly does mean a lot. So if you do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And again, we love talking ball with you guys in the comment section. So let us know how you guys are feeling. Dill, let's get into this one. I want to start at the quarterback position because not only did they add 3 quarterbacks, which is an insane amount, but in terms of the future of this quarterback room, it seems like it's in pretty darn good hands here.
I mean, ultimately, they're making strides to running an offense that doesn't make you want to fall asleep, and that's what that is why Luke Fickell's here, and that's why he brought in Phil Longo. Because if Wisconsin's ever going to get over the hump and start beating Ohio State and Michigan and everyone in the Big Ten with any sort of or ever really. They need to start playing a little different.
The Phil Longo hire, I think, is so over, like just underestimated. Yeah, Luke Fickell is one of the best head coaches in college football. That's a phenomenal hire. Don't get me wrong on that. Bringing in Phil Longo is one of you couldn't have dreamed of this 5 years ago. The Wisconsin offense being coached by Phil Longo. You look at what Phil Longo's done, developing Sam Howell, developing Drake May. Amazing track record in explosive offenses in quarterback development, starting with the quarterback spot. I love what they did. They go out and get Tanner Mordecai, who is why you won't find many quarterbacks, especially in the transfer portal, over the last 2 years throwing for over 7,000 yards, over 70 touchdowns. One of the more prolific quarterbacks in college football. You get him in for his 6th year as a veteran guy, and then you go in and bring in Braden Lockey and Nick Evers as kind of some young projects. That's my favorite part of this transfer portal edition is you get your veteran guy who's going to win you a lot of football games in 2023, and then let Phil Longo go to work with some really young, talented arms that are also brought in.
He might start to reestablish a culture of offensive football that will attract good high school players to go play football at Wisconsin. Because right now, it'll always be a struggle to get those A+ quarterbacks, those A+ wideouts. They obviously can recruit that running back spot, and I'm sure that's not going to really change.
That won't change
as long as they can recruit up front like they have. But again, I think getting that steady hand in there right now, again, not a guy who's maybe going to light the world on fire, but it's going to be a guy who it will change the culture of the offense and just again start ushering this program into the future where again we're talking about them truly competing for a Big Ten, which they never really did with Paul Chryst.
Yeah, and Tanner Mordecai, in terms of what Phil Longo wants to do on the offensive side of the ball, Tanner Mordecai is the perfect fit. And again, he didn't look great in the spring game. I believe he threw 4 interceptions. Braden Lockey from Mississippi State looked phenomenal. And what I'm hearing from the spring practice notes is he's pretty firmly in that quarterback 2, and Nick Evers slides down to quarterback 3, quarterback 4. But I think the general observation with this quarterback room is you got 3 really talented guys, Tanner Mordecai, the experienced one, and 2 really high ceiling guys below who are going to be able to learn behind one of the more prolific quarterbacks and one of the best offensive minded coaches in Phil Longo. The quarterback situation looks really, really pretty in the future. And then you talked about it the most. Wisconsin has struggled to bring in those elite guys on the outside, the wide receivers, because if you're a top 100 national wide receiver, looking at Madison, Wisconsin, you're probably not going to get that many opportunities. With Phil Longo and Luke Fickell in town, that suddenly appears to be a much more enticing chance for you. And you look at what they did in the wide receiver room in the transfer portal, they did a phenomenal job.
And to bring a guy like CJ Williams, who essentially from where he came from at USC and what he was in college, a year ago, this never happens. Like a guy
No.
like CJ Williams doesn't look twice at Madison, Wisconsin, and play for a team like the Badgers. But again, I think what they're doing, they're going to revolutionize this culture. Bryson Green, a guy who caught for a lot of yards at Oklahoma State, sees like some future, some chance at Wisconsin, and that's ultimately what Luke Fickell needs to do, and Phil Longo needs to do is sell that type of player. Those guys that you have a future here. You can play big time football here.
And I think, and that's not even too like we're pretty high on this Wisconsin team in terms of the wide receivers. They're coming back. Some of the more underrated players in the country just didn't really have the opportunity under that Graham Mertz led offense last year. But I also like, and I don't think it's talked about enough, is there's too much emphasis on just the quality of the player, not the age of the player. Like CJ Williams is a 2022 cat, so he's coming in this year, and then he's got plenty of eligibility for Wisconsin to use him and develop this program. You look down the list, Bryson Green, he's going into his third year, another young guy with plenty of eligibility left. And then Quincy Burrows, another 2022 cat. Luke Fickell, outside of Bryson Green and CJ Williams, who I'm sure Wisconsin fans are extremely excited about just because CJ Williams being a former top 100 national recruit, Bryson Green tearing it up in the Big 12 like he did. Luke Fickell wouldn't have brought these guys from Cincinnati and Quincy Burrows and Will Pauling if he did not think they could play at the Big Ten level. So I think you have 4 wide receivers coming in who you're feeling really good about. And then I want to take a look
you
at
got to trust Luke Fickell's opinion on it, because at the end of the day,
100%.
For not being able to recruit big time players because they're not Power 5 team in Cincinnati, he brought a lot of guys who got picked in the NFL draft who are succeeding in the NFL. So you kind of trust his eye for the talent. Again, 24/7 maybe says these guys aren't the best players in the world, but I feel like at this point I'm trusting Luke Fickell over these.
Yeah, Luke Fickell, I think, has been really good in 2 facets. One, the development of players. You see the amount of draft picks he churned out at Cincinnati, but going off what you said, the scouting department, his eye for kind of some of the diamonds in the rough has been phenomenal. And so some of these guys like Sauce Gardner going back to Cincinnati, being a 3-star out of high school, being a top 5 pick in the NFL draft, defensive player rookie of the year. Luke Fickell has an eye for talent. He also develops guys. I want to talk about the offensive line too, because kind of going on this, I'm only bringing the kids from Cincinnati that I think can contribute at the Big Ten level. And Madison, Jake Renfro, a guy that was an all-conference center, I believe hurt his knee. I believe it was a knee injury, missed the whole 2022 season. And then Joe Huber, a guy who was a walk-on and started at right tackle for Cincinnati, a pretty damn good football team last year. 2 guys that I don't even know if they're going to start, but in terms of adding depth to an already really good group, you feel good about that too.
And I will say this offensive line probably could use a couple transfers. That Wisconsin offensive line was definitely not what probably we were accustomed to. And again, Luke Fickell being kind of a trenches guy, I'm sure that's going to get cranked back up. There's still really talented guys on that team. Again, I just think it's hard to say. I don't know. The last year just went horribly wrong. For kind of everyone in a sense. The defense played okay at times, but it just didn't go right. And I think adding a couple big time veteran transfers is going to help that offensive line, bring up some of these younger players, and just get it back rolling, because you got the pieces there. You add a few guys who are proven commodities, if you will. I think you can get this offensive line back rolling to what it needs to be at Wisconsin to be the team they want to be.
Yeah, it's actually funny because you talk about the Phil Longo offense and the spread and kind of what it looked like during the spring game. And then when they started running the football behind a very good offensive line with Braylon Allen, that's when the offense really started taking off. And I don't think they're going to go away from that. Luke Fickell knows the talent that he has in Braylon Allen. He knows the dogs he has up front in that offensive line. Yes, you're going to see some more explosive plays. You're going to see it a little bit more spread out. But in terms of running the rock and being physical, I don't think Wisconsin's going to lose that. Now, heading over to the defense side of the ball, you lose a couple guys on the defensive line that you liked a lot, Keanu Benton, Nick Herbig, 2 guys that went in the NFL draft relatively high. You go and get a guy in Darian Varner, Jeff Petrowski, just adding some depth. But this defense, I'm very impressed. A lot of the talk is on the offensive side of the football because that's what's being revolutionized. Death taxes in Wisconsin's defense still being very, very good. 6 turnovers in the spring game. This team flies around. They have a lot of players in the secondary. They go and add some guys who can get after the passer up front. One thing I want to talk about is that Wisconsin got active in the transfer portal in the winter, But after the spring, they didn't add anybody. And what does that say? Wisconsin fans might be saying, okay, what's the deal? I think it's more that's a good thing. Luke Fickell saying, hey, I'm coming out of this spring practice session saying I like our roster a lot. I like where we stand. We don't need to go out and add any more players in the transfer portal because I like the guys we already have in the building heading into the fall here.
And that's the thing. Like on the defensive side, they really didn't lose a ton besides a few guys up front. And again, they did replace those guys, but you're returning a set of linebackers who might be one of the best in the country. You're returning a fair amount from that back end that played really good football. Looks like it's going to take the football away, which is obviously a massive part of playing defense today. And so really you didn't need to add. They reloaded that offense. They kind of brought in a new culture, a guy, if you will. And they made a few key additions at the defense, but yeah, why would you go out and like really try to get 12, 13 guys on the defensive side? You didn't need to.
Yeah, and overall B+ for me. Like I really like what they did at the quarterback spot. I like the personnel they brought in terms of the pass catchers on the offensive side of the ball. And hey, I give Luke Fickell a B+. Luke Fickell is a hell of a lot smarter than me. He probably thinks it's an A. And I think a lot of Wisconsin fans are probably very happy with what they did in the transfer portal. That'll do it for the boys, but wanted to hop on, talk a little bit of Wisconsin football, talk about what they did in the transfer portal, dating all the way back to early January. Appreciate you guys checking us out again. If you do enjoy the content, lock in, consider subscribing to the channel. We appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later.